Jessica Morgenthal at Resilience Gone Wild, and I am here with my fabulous producer, Kai Sorensen, for Shark Week.
Yeah, so excited to be here. Jessica, what's great about this is when I was 11, 12, watching Shark Week on the Discovery Channel, I never thought I'd be 38 on next weekend.
Oh, happy birthday.
30 great, I'm calling it.
Yay.
Taking part in a Shark Week. So that's really cool for me. Sharks have always been my second favorite animal next to the sea turtle. So yeah, just really excited for all the conversations we've been having.
Okay, wait a minute. Just for fun, just explore the fact that we did not know each other. We got connected by somebody who had no idea that both of us loved sea turtles and sharks. How weird is it that those are your two favorite animals and they've become my two favorite animals? That is really cool.
Yeah, I think it's super fun. And I think growing up in landlocked Nebraska, of course, going back to our first episode, the reason I love these animals so much is because of the Henry Dorley Aquarium in Omaha, Nebraska, going there as a kid. And again, I think it's a lot of what we're going to get into with the fascinating people we're going to talk to David Ebert this week for episode 1. And just kind of this idea of how curiosity led to empathy, which led to conservation in his entire career.
David Ebert, rare shark guy, really important in the field of finding new species of sharks because they're going extinct and we need to care about them. We need to find them, care about them, and save them. Mm-hmm. And then talking to Francesca Page today about the 200 Shark Project. She has dug up and done this magnificent art about 200 sharks, and that's not even all of them. So
yeah, and that's getting to episode 3, and I think with Francesca, it's just her combination of her art with conservation is just such a beautiful career she's found. And so again, we just have talked to so many people this season because we're wrapping up season 1 with the next 3 weeks. Maybe there'll be a bonus one in there. We don't know yet, but we live on the edge of our seat here at Resilience Gone Wild. But in between, Jessica, I think you were struggling with what shark you want to do our animal episode about. So you want to give us a little sneak peek on who I get to do some sound design underneath?
Yeah, I can't wait for your sound design, especially because sharks don't actually make a sound, but they are part of the ocean, the soundscape of the ocean. So it's Shark Week, and it's also the 50th anniversary of Jaws. And that anniversary in my world and in Kai's world is all about looking back at 50 years of fear that was created from this ta-dum movie that was not intended to create a 50 years of fear that has continued to kill.
Right, and misinformation around sharks in general.
Yeah. So we're all about re-looking at whether sharks are really something to be afraid of or something to be in awe of. And our guests talk to that, and we are all about changing that metaphor. Sharks are not a bad thing. Sharks are so desperately, desperately needed as part of the ecosystems that they live in. They are apex predators, and I thought it would be kind of cool to do the great white shark, because that's the Jaws shark, as mine. But I couldn't really fall in love with the great white shark, and it was kind of common, right? And I don't do common. I mean, I do tardigrades, right? We need to do stuff that we don't know about so that we fall in love with new characters, and Tasmanian devil, all that. And I just love whale sharks. They are literally the largest non-mammal in the world, and they are spectacularly beautiful. And they have this amazing resilience, among other things, that we can relate to about having the thickest skin. So watch for this episode that's coming up around having thick skin like the whale sharks, and just go out there and find pictures. Francesca Page has some incredible ones that she's drawn.
Some award-winning photography,
totally.
Which we post to in the show notes. And as well as David's decades-long career of shark research has also contributed to what we know about sharks today. And again, in the show notes there'll be links to his work. And actually, I looked at Sharks of the World, I think it's called. I think I'm misspeaking. But anyways, I just kind of...
That was his Bible. That was his shark Bible,
but flipping through it, it's I was just online. I was kind of glancing through the book, and it's just so cool to see just stepping through how sharks work, and just it's a beautiful blend of science and cool and diagrams. So before we get to interviews, all this talk of please post a review, and guess what? Somebody did, and it's a long one, so we're gonna get through it because it's so good. Nina from New
And
York.
we don't know who Nina is. It could be a Nina I know, but I don't know.
All right, well, Resilience Gone Wild is one podcast that may indeed have something for everyone. Jessica Morgenthal's well-researched and entertaining dives into the natural world, typically in the company of experts in their fields, reminds me of that favorite teacher who made science come alive. She focuses on the unique resilience mechanisms of species other than our own, providing examples that are extraordinary and often breathtaking. This focus, in and of itself, could be a 3-credit course. Wow. The substantial icing on the cake, however, is that Jessica gently offers how we might learn and what we might do physically, psychologically, and spiritually. To attain a similar resilience in our own lives, Jessica's respect for nature is exceeded only by her respect for human capability. You simply do not leave these podcasts without feeling a bit more informed, a bit more energized, and a bit more hopeful for the world.
So beautiful. Thank you, Nina.
Well written. Thank you, Nina.
We so appreciate it. Yeah.
All right. Well, on that note, should we get to the interview?
Get to the interview.
All right. Enjoy Shark Week, everybody. The next 3 episodes. Enjoy.
Welcome, David Ebert. I am so thrilled to welcome you to Resilience Gone Wild. This has been many months in the making, and we've targeted all towards Shark Week, which is upon us. And it's probably keeping you very busy because you're the lost shark guy among other titles and names that you've taken on. So I can't wait to have this conversation with you. Sure. I met you through Andrew Lewin, who was on our podcast a few months ago, and he said he now has a podcast with you. I guess it's been going on for a while.
Yep.
The Beyond Jaws
Yes.
podcast, because Jaws is turning 50 years old. It'll already have been 50 years since the date that it dropped by the time this airs, I think, a few days before. But we're celebrating, and we're going to have this amazing conversation about finding lost sharks, lost species, extinction, what metaphor and naming does for and not for different species. And you have this great take on it that you just gave me a little bit of a taste on. So let's get going. So tell us about yourself, Dave.
Well, I'm Dave Ebert, and I'm the program manager for the Pacific Shark Research Center at Moss Landing Marine Laboratories out here in the Monterey area. And we're part of the San Jose State University program here in the science department. And I've been doing this I've been doing sharks pretty much my whole life, my whole adult life. But I actually got interested in sharks when I was about 5 years old, and my parents gave me a book on sharks. And I thought this was like the coolest things I'd ever seen. And of course, when you're 5 years old, you think people are going to grow out of this. And it's like, no, I just kind of kept getting more interested in it. And when I was about 10 years old, I thought I got to figure out a way to somehow study sharks and travel the world, because I love to travel. Or, I was only 10 years old, but, so you're still thinking, okay, kids, sharks, dinosaurs, whales. But I just was like, I just never grew. I just one of those kids, I just never grew out of it. And I just knew what I wanted to do. And I was very fortunate, as you'll hear on some of the little turns and twists along my journey as I went along, because this was, this is in the 1960s, which is ancient history for a lot of the younger people here when I was growing up. And then things kind of started back at that time, like shark research was non-existent. And it's hard for young people today to understand that are into this field, because before World War II, the only thing about sharks that were done was anatomical research, or maybe if they did a faunal review of fishes from some area, they'd mention the sharks there. And that was pretty much it. And then World War II came along, and then during that time, there's a lot of these horrific stories about pilots and sailors being stranded at sea. They experienced a horrific combat experience, and they would have survived, and they survived, and then they'd be find themselves in the water, and there'd be sharks around. And a lot of these stories came back to the public, and probably one of the best known stories was of the USS Indianapolis, which is actually recounted by Quint in the movie, where he was in the movie. He talks about having been on the boat. And this was a boat that delivered the atomic bomb.
Wow! Wait, this is in the movie Jaws?
Yeah. Well, no, this really happened. In the movie, Quint talks about having been on the ship, but it's a true story.
Yeah.
And after they dropped off the atomic bomb on Leyte, I think it was the island.
Wow.
The ship
I don't think anybody knows that. I think everybody assumes that it was just it flew all the way from the States on the Enola Gay, and that it didn't have a ship in the middle of it. So this is actually an interesting extra.
The Indianapolis actually sailed from Oakland, California.
Wow.
With the atomic bomb. And I mentioned that because my father grew up in Oakland, California. So,
Wow.
But anyway, they sailed, went over there and they delivered the bomb. And then on the way back to where, I can't remember, it was Tinian, I think they were going to. Don't quote me on the islands. I might be a little off the islands, but after they dropped off the bomb, they're sailing back. And because it was such a top secret thing, they were on complete radio silence. Well, they got torpedoed by a Japanese submarine and the ship sank pretty quickly. And
Oh my God, that was on the way back though. Like how crazy would our world be if it had been torpedoed on the way there instead of on the way back?
That's a whole, it'd be really interesting if it happened on the way in versus the way back. But what happened was basically you had, I think there was like 11 or 1,200 sailors on the ship. And after it sank, there was still about 900 to 1,000 survived. Well, because they're in such a top secret mission, there was no distress warning went out.
Wow.
And so these guys were in the waters for about 4 or 5 days. And most of them died from exposure and from injuries, but some were attacked by sharks. Wow. And when these stories kind of drifted back, this was in like late July 1945, literally about a week or so 10 days before they dropped the first bomb. But anyway, what happened was all these stories for this, and there was other stories that came back after the war about people surviving this and then being attacked by sharks. And so the Office of Naval Research invested a lot of money for decades looking at ways to prevent shark attacks, shark repellents, and similar types of things. And most shark research for decades, up until the early was all funded through the Office of Naval Research and all revolved around shark attack.
Wow.
And how to prevent shark attack. And it was, again, because it had a military implication. And
Wow.
a lot of the people that were my mentors, and I'll talk a little more about like Leonard Campagno, some of these other people, Sonny Gruber, Don Nelson, these are all like prominent names, Perry Gilbert. These guys were all funded largely a lot through the Office of Naval Research.
Wow.
And that
it's
went
so
on
interesting because the whales it's a different story, but it's a similar story that the recognition of whales and the singing and the sound from whales came out of World War II as well. And that never would have happened. And I think it was probably funded to a certain extent after that in terms of research by the military.
Right. Yeah. It was literally in a couple of the primer books that were written on sharks that in the 1960s that a fellow named Perry Gilbert, who was at Cornell University, edited, were basically on it explored some other areas, but a lot of it had to do with sharks and types of sharks and shark attack. And anyway, my mentor, Leonard Campagno, who went to Stanford University, he grew up in San Francisco and went to Stanford. He received funding from this all the way up. And in fact, the last product that was produced from all of this was a 2-volume series called The Catalog of the Sharks of the World that was published by the Food and Agriculture Organization, which is part of the United Nations.
Okay, wow. Like just to process that for a second, that the publisher of the primary books on sharks was the Food and Agriculture.
FAO, Food
right?
and Agriculture
Right.
Organization.
But I guess they were in charge of fisheries as well.
Yeah,
right?
that was what it was under it came through it was done through their fisheries. They have a big fisheries and aquaculture program. Yeah. Food security is what it really ties into. But the funding, but they go out and get funding from different countries for different things, and this culmination. Where I'm going with this whole thing, this culmination of these Catalog of the Sharks of the World that was published in 1984 came about because of the Office of Naval Research, because of World War II and all these shark attacks. And
amazing.
This was sort of the penultimate publication from this. And I remember Jaws, just again for people's reference, Jaws came out in June of 1975.
Right, which was 10 years before that. So
yeah, literally.
Yeah.
And my advisor, Leonard Campagno, who wrote these catalog, which if you're in the shark world, these are like classic references.
Yeah.
You can download them, the PDFs online. He actually consulted on the movie Jaws in designing the mechanical shark they called Bruce in the movie.
Wow.
And so if you watch the movie, at the very end of the movie, the last credit that comes up, they thank Mr. Leonard J.V. Campagno, Stanford University.
Wow, that's pretty wild.
And
I've seen Bruce in, I don't know if it's the same Bruce, but I have seen Bruce is it at Disney or at Universal?
I think it's Universal. Yeah, I haven't seen it, but I think it's Universal.
You've never been through the Jaws exhibit where they anyway, it's pretty funny. So Bruce is still around, I think.
Yeah. Well, they had all kinds of problems with them because of the salt water and the rust when they actually took it out to use it. But Leonard's part was he went down there and he told me the story about walking around with Spielberg because at the time they wanted to make that shark look real. And again, when the movie came out, I was in high school, and I have to say at that time, the shark looked really real. There was nothing like that. You just thought that was you watch it now and you're kind of like, yeah, it looks like kind of a mechanical shark. It doesn't really, but if you can put yourself back at that time, special effects were nothing like they are today.
Yeah.
They just were nothing
like
they.
It was pretty cool. I have to say.
It was awesome.
But take us back a little bit because I thought that you had gotten your PhD in South Africa with.
Yeah. Well, I'm heading that way. That's where I'm heading toward.
So take us back because I love hearing these origin stories and I volunteer as a docent in the aquarium section of Loggerhead Marine Life Center, and we have 2 nurse sharks and we have some stingrays, 2 stingrays, and there's nothing that lights me up more than the conversations that I have with kids coming through a very young age, as well as, up through. So maybe they'll be from, 4 or 5, like when you started, and then 9, 10, 15, where they've kept it on. And they're so enamored and so knowledgeable and about these conversations about sharks. And the parents are like so impressed by their kids, right? Like it doesn't feel like the parents know very much. They just love hearing their kids being excited about it. And they're like, wait, they know this one, Charlie knows more. Ask Charlie more questions about it. And they are just so excited about, and it feels like these kids are going to stay in the world like you did. Like they'll have some of this same energy of like, this is the coolest thing in the world to be connected to a shark.
I'll tell you a funny story. When I was, went and saw my guidance counselor for, your senior year of high school, you go see a guidance counselor. And this was obviously after the movie Jaws had come out, and he kind of asked me, now you're talking about it like 17 at the time or something, and asked me what I was planning to do. And I said, well, I'm going to go to college and then I'm going to travel the world. I'm going to study sharks. And I still remember him sitting there, kind of like looked up at me, and he didn't say anything. He was just He goes, oh, that's good. You have some ambition, Dave. Have you thought about a plan B in case that shark thing doesn't work out? And I was like, no,
Nope.
not really. He goes, well, kind of good luck with that shark thing. But I'll say he was not dismissive at all. He did not, he kind of encouraged me like, okay, well, good. I got, it's great. Good luck. And about 10 years later, and I'm going to get to this before I went to South Africa to study sharks, I saw him, and I was over at my old high school, and I saw him there, and we got to talking. I told him what I was doing and everything. And I said, do you remember me talking to you about studying sharks? And he's like, oh yeah. He goes, thousands of kids I've had here. You're like the only shark guy I ever had come through here. And I said, so what do you think about it? And he goes, I get so many kids come through here, have no idea what they're going to do, and they're like months away from graduating. He goes, you at least had a direction, like, okay, I'm going to do this. He goes, honestly, I didn't think the shark thing was going to work out for you, but you had a direction, so I wasn't going to impede that, or get in the way of that. And so I always was I thought about that years later, kind of it was really good in his part that he didn't just dismiss it like, oh, well, this guy's lost his mind or something. But he was just, he just, I had a direct, and I did. I knew where I wanted to go on everything. But again, this was just right, a year or two after Jaws came out. And I come back to, at that time, there was no field of shark research, other than Shark Attack. There was, so, here I am going along for, the first sort of 12, 13 years, from the time I was 5 years old, I'm going to go study sharks. And there really was no field. Yeah. There was no field.
And there wasn't any YouTube to learn quick stuff about it. There was only the books that were written and the papers that might have been written. There was nothing.
And
so how did you actually keep up with this?
I did. Well, and again, I talked to people. I talked with some of my cohorts in the same age group and stuff. We all had the same similar story, but one thing all of us will tell you about is in 1971, before Jaws, the book came out, there was a movie came out called Blue Water, White Death. And it was a search for the great white shark. And it was the first time somebody, and this included Rod and Valerie Taylor, Stan Waterman, Peter Gimbel, Rodney Fox, a lot of people, names that became prominent later. They actually did a movie that they documented where they went around the world to find a white shark to film live in the wild, and that was so revolutionary. It was, people just couldn't believe it, and that was actually a kind of a precursor if you wanted to, before Jaws, obviously this was like 4 years before the movie came out. And that was for someone like me, being at that age, whatever, I was like, 12 years old or something when it came out, 11, 12. It just further inspired me. Like, I want to go do that. I want to travel the world and go. It was literally, they were doing what I wanted to do. Travel around the world.
What's funny about it, what's coming up for me is that I live in Florida now during the winters, and there's great white sharks around us.
Oh, yeah.
Like, it's not that hard to find a great white shark.
Nowadays.
Was it harder? Why is it so much easier now? Tell me what the story, quick story is.
This is where I'm going with Jaws. It brought awareness to sharks. When the movie Jaws came out, the blue water white death was interesting. And I would recommend anybody, if you're, go see it. It's nothing like you'll see today because it's very raw. This was done over 50 years ago, but it's from a historical thing. It's neat. It's really cool to see. But when Jaws came out in 75, what it really did was it brought sharks kind of into the limelight in that you talk about, being in Florida now, everybody sees sharks, they know about white sharks now. Well, part of why they know there's white sharks out there now is because you have groups like the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy, up in New England putting satellite tags on sharks. And so they track these sharks.
Right. Yeah.
And so now, and I know it's been on social media lately, and that's maybe where you've been seeing it too, where they're seeing these sharks up and down the Florida coast, and everybody's like, wait a minute, we had no idea there were sharks here in Florida, or at least white sharks.
Yeah.
And
honestly, people with drones who aren't sending those drones that far offshore are seeing them as well. So they're right there, but they're not bothering us. So let's just put it out there.
And and I'm here in the Monterey area, and if you go, and I grew up in this area, and if you go out now, I'll go up in there's a helicopter, do helicopter tours around here, and they go up and we'll go spot looking for white sharks. I'll go along about a 2-mile stretch of beach, and I'll count 40 white sharks.
Wow.
Literally. And this is a popular beach, and you'll see kids playing in the surf. Their parents are, we're up above, obviously, in a helicopter, and parents laying on the beach, kids playing in the surf, and right in back of the surf break, you'll count 8, 10 white sharks just kind of hanging out. No idea, because when you're down at the water level, you don't see them. Because most of the time, the sharks are not finning at the surface. They're below the surface. So unless you're up high, you don't see them. And then we're in about that time of the year now where there's plenty of white, and these are small, like 6 to 8 footer, but if they're, I'm 6 foot, if they're bigger than me, I'm kind of giving them a lot of respect, let's say.
Okay, let's just I got to ask you the obvious question. So is this safe? Is this scary? Like, should there be some greater boundary between kids swimming and the white sharks that are right over on the other side of the surf?
Well, and I'll add too, there's probably more white sharks along the coast now than there was when I was growing up, even though they were around. I think the thing is, part of it's an awareness of what's going on. But the statistics I like to use is that since 1950, now, whatever, 75 years, there's on average 3 or 4 shark attacks in California a year. And, with a range of anywhere from 0 to, I think the high is 8 or 9 at most in a year. And, but the population of California has gone from like 15 million to 40 million. And there's a lot more people in the water now than were back in 1950. People are surfing, they're doing stand-up paddleboard. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And yet the number of shark attacks hasn't really increased.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'd love to go down that path a little, because one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode was to just put some of the real information out there that will hopefully dissuade the unbelievable fear of sharks and the interest of sharks in us. So, I mean, some of the numbers I read, I think last year there were like 67 or something unprovoked shark attacks in the world. The number of people, you don't get the number that goes with it, which is where you're going with this. Like, how many people swim in the ocean where there are sharks, during the course of a year? Billions, right? Like chance of having, and the provoked shark attacks, which are people annoying sharks and all that kind of thing, aren't even that high. They're higher than the unprovoked, but the chances of having an episode that is dangerous with a shark of any sort is so slim that, like, literally you must have, I'm guessing you have some of these comparisons, like, 100 times less than being hit by lightning, or like, what are the numbers?
They throw out, I mean, there's all kinds of examples you can pick up, like on social media about, like, their chance of getting killed driving to the beach, is much higher than actually being attacked by shark. I mean, look, there's certain areas you could, popular beaches, not so much, but there are areas you could go if you wanted to like find a shark to attack you. There's some areas you could go that we would probably get in trouble if you wanted to. And just because, and they're usually known areas that people know, like this is not a good area to go swimming in. And a lot of times this time of the year, a lot of times it's more diving. That people like if you're going abalone diving.
You make a really important point. It's a specific time of the year. There are times when I've listened to some of your podcasts and stuff, and your videos, like there's times when you just did one on the whale sharks with Andrew that, at a certain exact time each year, whale sharks, which are not dangerous, by the way, but to humans, find themselves, I think, off Cozumel or something, like where there's a specific full moon snapper something or other. Yeah. And like, so don't go in the water at that exact moment.
Right.
Right.
Well, there's a lot you get when the snappers are spawning, basically. There's a lot of food in the water. And you get areas off Belize and Honduras and Cozumel and these areas, Cancun. There's several areas in the Caribbean, and they do tours there and stuff. But at times of the year, there's going to be a lot of gametes in the water from the groupers, and then that's when the whale sharks. They're going to be there at that time, and a lot of places have these sort of whale tours going on. But you also got to keep in mind too, when there's a lot of food in the water, you kind of just work your way up the food chain. There's probably going to be some other predators there that are not as friendly, let's say, that feed on something more than plankton.
So I have to throw this in every time it sort of pops up for me, is just the mind-blowing intelligence and a capacity for these ancient creatures. Sharks have been around before the dinosaurs, right? Like ancient creatures that are most of our world, that have developed such unbelievable skill, adaptation, intelligence, all that they know exactly where to be. They travel thousands of miles, and I always go back to the sea turtles that nest, and the salmon that nest on the beach they were born, because that has the best chance for their offspring. The whale sharks have the best chance of getting the right, food that they're looking for if they go to the exact location, but they can find it and they know exactly when to go. Right. So like just the process, what would you call it? Is it intelligence? Is it instinct? Is it adaptation? And all of it.
It's like, we're in the Pacific Northwest here, you have salmon that come back to the same rivers. Yeah. They're born there, they leave, they come back 2-3 years later. It's the same thing. And you see this throughout the animal kingdom. Yeah, birds. You get migratory
know exactly
birds.
Where the food is, right? And they go north to south pole. Like, it's crazy.
Right. And and sharks are the same way. And rays too. They'll these big migrations of rays. People don't think about them as often. They're basically just flat sharks is what they are. But they'll migrate distances, some species, not all, but some species, and whale sharks are a good example. They'll go thousands of kilometers to a location. And they've tagged some off. They've tagged these are basking sharks, I guess, but same type of thing. They feed on plankton. They've tagged some off New England that have shown up off the Amazon River in Brazil. We're like, well, we had no idea they went that way, but they're clearly going there. And if they had the resources to tag more, you'd find there'd be a pattern would emerge, much like these whale sharks off Cozumel and Cancun and these areas. At certain times of the year when those fish are spawning, they're going to be there, and they have some kind of a innate ability to understand, to know when and where to be. And that's a whole area of animal behavior I've not experienced in, but I've seen it.
Incredible.
I know it goes on.
Incredible.
It's like here we get white shark. White sharks show up here pretty much about this time of year. They're here, and they'll be here till about November, December. They'll start tailing off by November. So
Northern California. That's where we're.
In central Northern California, they show up here. And we know they're going to be here, and then they take off. And we got a little more information on white sharks now. We know they'll migrate out towards Hawaii into an area called the Cafe out there. We have no idea. That's one of the things they're trying to figure out now. Like this area they go to, nobody can figure out, like, what are they going out there for? Because it seems to be kind of a dead zone in the ocean where there's just not.
Wow.
It's not much.
So I always ask the question, what do they know?
Yeah.
Like, they go there for a reason consistently. Yeah. There's a pattern. What do they know? They know something because it keeps them alive,
Another thing too with a lot of these sharks is because at different stages of their life they go different places. And this is the interesting thing with the sharks is that when they're young they might stay in a nursery area. It's called a nursery area. They may not be able to migrate that far. And then as they get up a little older, kind of, maturing, they'll start migrating to further areas. And then adults will have a very specific areas they'll go to. And that's how do they learn that behavior?
Right.
There's no parental supervision really to speak of.
It's incredible.
And yet they know where to go.
It's common of a lot of species, like that the children go to, stay in a different place and somehow they know.
Yeah.
Like, what do they know? And then they are also learning. It's partly instinct, obviously, but they're also learning to make good decisions because they have to survive. So.
Yeah. Obviously you have a lot more young that are born that, not very many usually make it to adulthood realistically. And you have, usually they try to, the young, they usually try to birth in an area where there's like a lot of rich food resources, but we just don't really know. You stumble on these areas that are a nursery area, but you don't always know. Sometimes you get lucky. So literally you get lucky.
So I interrupted. You were taking us on this journey, this amazing journey from when sharks were not really known and there wasn't any research. And then you came in because I know you were really early in this whole development and really a pioneer. So I think you're headed to South Africa at some point. So
well, what I was saying is when I left high school in sort of the mid 70s and started college late 70s, there was, I didn't know this. Talk about ignorance being bliss. If I had any idea, I might have, I don't know if I would have or not, but I had no idea there was no real field of shark research at the time. And so, but I had this mission. I knew where I wanted to go, and I walked, and so I did my undergraduate degree, and this funny story I tell sometimes. I was lucky enough I was kind of thinking, I had no idea of a grad school. Back, this is a time, you thought, I was a generation like, oh, thank God this guy got a bachelor's degree, because it was either that or probably, working at a fast food restaurant the rest of my life or something. And as I was leaving, and I tell this story sometimes because it just, especially to younger people, it's like you meet people along your journey in life sometimes, and sometimes you meet someone for a cup of coffee that has a tremendous influence on the trajectory of your life or your career. And this happened to me when I was finishing up my degree at Humboldt State University. A professor there I knew, he was actually an invertebrate guy, John D. Martini, asked me, what are you going to be doing? I said, well, I'm going to graduate, next semester, and I'm going to head off and go study sharks around the world. He goes, oh, that's a great idea, Dave, and he goes, why don't we go have a cup of coffee? And I'm like, okay, great, So, and when I was there, when I was having a cup of coffee, he starts saying, you really need to think about doing a master's degree if you want to go anywhere in this field. And I'm thinking, oh my God, a master's degree? Jesus, I'm lucky just to get a bachelor's degree. But I listened to what he said, and I said, well, if I'm going to do a master's degree, I'm going to do what I want to do, and I'm going to work on sharks. And so fortunately for me, I grew up near Moss Landing Marine Laboratories here in the Monterey area. And so right at this time, this is what I talk about, I'm going to go into this whole Jaws generation. I went and talked to, this was the early 90s, 1981 or so, I talked to Greg Kaye, who was just starting up a shark program at the Marine Lab, and at that time, it was because there was a lot of interest in sharks. People were going like...
Because of Jaws.
And it was all because of Jaws. They wanted to know, like, well, how many sharks are there? How many, and so I was really fortunate there was right, close by to where I grew up. And so I went and talked to him, and, it's again, one of these conversations you have, like I was interviewing to go to grad school, and kind of asked him when I finished, I said, and again, I went through my undergrad, no clue. I was, grad school is not even on my radar. And I sort of said, do you think I got a chance to get in here? And he goes, oh, Dave, getting in is not your problem. Your problem is me getting out of here. And I was like, okay. But, he gave me a chance, and that's, in life, if somebody gives you an opportunity, take it. And it's up to me to make it. So I went and started doing my master's degree, and I was working on some sharks, a group of sharks in San Francisco Bay, 7-gill sharks. And while I was doing that, I met a guy named Leonard Capagno, who I'd mentioned before. And Leonard at this point in time, he'd finished Stanford University, and he was working at the Tiburon Marine Lab in Marin County, just across the Golden Gate Bridge. He was an adjunct there, working on soft money. And when I first met him in 1982, he was working on the catalog of the sharks of the world. Wow,
what a time. Just being in the right place at the right time and making sure that you met the right people.
Oh, yeah. No, it was totally, if you're going to go to grad school, I tell us, young people and stuff, like, work on something you want to work on, and find somebody in the field who's like the best that you can in the field you can go work with. And at the time with Leonard, and it was a funny story, but when I met him, I was coming in from fishing some sharks. I had some dogfish there, and Leonard was, let's say, an eccentric person, and but it was just pouring. I still remember it was pouring down rain. I was pulling up the boat. I was cleaning up the boat with my brother and a friend, and this guy walks by and kind of saw these dogfish in the boat and asked what I was doing. I said, "Oh, I'm from Moss Landing. I'm studying sharks." He's like, "I didn't know anybody studying seven-gill sharks here." And the next thing you know, we spent like 2 hours standing in the rain talking about sharks before he said, like, "You want to come on?" I said, "Do you mind if we get out of the rain?" He goes, "Oh yeah, why don't you come over to my office?" And I still remember walking into his office for another 3 hours. So this is after fishing all day. Yeah. And but I didn't want to. It was such a great opportunity, and here he had everything laid out. That I still remember this very clearly. He had everything laid out that he was working on the Sharks of the World book at the time, and he told me about it.
That's amazing to like walk in and see that in its process.
So when you see this online and you download stuff, I mean, I actually saw him, everything laid out, all because he was doing the illustrations. He was doing. He was kind of an all around. I mean, he was a brilliant guy, and they say he's kind of eccentric. And so anyway, I got to know him during my graduate studies there over the next couple of years. We got to be pretty good friends. I'd stop in and see him and stuff when I was up there. And he was like an encyclopedia, he was
writing the encyclopedia and he was an encyclopedia.
And during this time here, he'd done an around the world trip through the Food and Agriculture Organization to work on the book. And again, this was funded by Office of Naval Research.
Yeah.
And so when the project ended, he was basically looking for employment, because his funding was running out. And it turned out he got offered a job in South Africa. 8 months later, he called me up from South Africa and tells me he has a PhD post in South Africa if I want it.
Wow.
And the next thing I knew, I was on a plane to South Africa.
Well, one of the things that you made me think of is, in terms of like the fear of going in the water for the sharks, there was this judgment, I'm sure, that you got thrown with, that you're going to South Africa. Like, that's not a place to go. It's not safe. It's not worth it. It's not whatever. And you're like, you know what? Those are just stories you've heard. Some of stories are always true, but like, that doesn't mean it should shut you down. Like, do a little more digging to see if you really shouldn't go in the water, if you really shouldn't go to South Africa, right?
Again, this is all pre-internet and stuff. As a young person, it's like, it was an adventure. I was setting off on an adventure, and what the heck? And it was the best decision I ever made. It was an amazing experience. I learned tons of stuff, and I experienced more life than I would have if I would have stayed here in California.
Yeah, and, so much to learn from this. Like, just sort of to put, follow your passions. Don't let people judge you for them. Don't believe the big stories that are out there. Do your own digging and look for the fact. Past the headlines. Like, you've said so many things that are so important in terms of, making a choice of what you pursue. I mean, I've pursued this latest chapter of my life, not when I was 20. And like, there was passion. There was just a sense of complete awe and opportunity when you meet, keep trying to meet people that light you up, and you never know where that opportunity is going to come. Right.
And I was just, like I said, I just went to study sharks. That was all my whole thing. I didn't really, I knew Leonard was there and stuff. And so I thought, well, let's go. And I had made some of the best friendships I've had. And I always tell, I got more out of it than I was expecting, because I got to see a side of life and experience a time and everything that was just amazing.
Yeah. So somehow you become the rare shark guy. People weren't even studying sharks, let alone you went into this entire new area that you must have completely lit you up, that you're connecting to saving from extinction, this 7-year-old shark that suddenly shows up, or 70 million, whatever you say.
As I said, as the Office of Naval Research funding stopped, other stuff, fisheries mainly, started funding shark research, because a lot of people wanted to know, how many shark species are there? How many, young do they produce? How old do they get? All that stuff. And so a lot of the funding went in that direction for life history studies. And I was just right at the tip of the spear, basically, me and my cohorts who caught that wave of shark research at the time. And I look back now, it's like we literally were the Jaws generation, and there's no other better way. Can't think of a better way to describe it, because if it was not for the movie Jaws, I don't believe any of that would have taken place. I wasn't referred to that as a time, but like in the 1980s when I was doing grad school, I'd be going into just these areas like in Namibia and other places, Africa. I was traveling through Asia, spent some few months in Asia. I would find these sharks and rays, and I'd go back. And this is the brilliance of having somebody like Leonard Campagna, who is a big name in the shark world. I'd go back and I'd show him these things, and he's like, "Where'd you get this thing?" And I'd say, "Oh, I got it here." And he says, "We haven't seen this thing for like 100 years. Or this thing's only known from like 3 specimens caught in the 1800s. Wow. And so they said, wasn't
They're
originally
in museums somewhere, like old museums. Right?
Exactly. There was a museum specimen from like 150 years ago, and nobody has seen one. And here I bring back like 6. Or there was one species there was one known specimen collected in the 50s, and this is like 1988, 89. I got like 36 in one day.
That's so fun. So one of the things that I just wanted to highlight is, because I learned this from some of the stuff I was watching and reading, that some of it, you're not spending all your time in the water, hanging out looking for a shark. Like, you're actually working with the humans who live in relatively remote areas, who are living this life and know the sea and know these species, and they so go down that path. Like, it's not a lone thing where you're just diving around looking for
no you just it was like I didn't have any like set. I just was fascinated by sharks and rays and ghost sharks in general, and I just wanted to like learn everything I could about them. But I started because of going to Africa and Asia and stuff. I would go out to these remote areas and stuff, and places where nobody would really go. And I was seeing these different species there. And to your question, people ask me like, do you spend a lot of time diving, or you out in a boat? And they're like, that's kind of cool, but you can't really do that much you're diving, you got maybe 45 minutes depending on how deep you are.
Yeah, you're very lucky.
if you're very lucky, and or if you're on a boat, you're one guy on a boat in the big ocean. Whereas if I go to like a village, I'll have 50 to 100 boats out fishing every day, and then I just walk through the landing site, or I'll go through the fish market there where they're offloading stuff, either where they're offloading when they land the boat or at the market nearby, and I just look at what they're bringing in. And I get to know the fishermen. And you might go, well, how do you get by if everybody's speaking Swahili, Dave? Well, I work with my local contacts there who are fluent in English and Swahili, and they're usually somebody that's connected with the village or the community. And so I get to know people, and specifically that's just some of the great experiences. Like I never thought about when I started, but I go to these places, and I've got people I've known for 40 years. I met in villages years. I still keep now with WhatsApp. I can keep in touch with them better.
That's pretty cool. And so
it was just a whole thing I never expected. But yeah, I would just build these contacts, and I work with local people. Now a lot of them will be with NGOs or their fisheries agencies or somebody, because otherwise it's just some guy wandering through a village in Africa from the U.S.
It sounds like you started when everything was unknown. So whatever sharks you found were mostly, except for this encyclopedia that was happening, like there really wasn't any knowledge about even the common sharks that were out there. You were just collecting this unbelievable breadth of information. And by the way, about any cartilaginous, which is the rays and the sharks and the ghost sharks and and now that, like, in 50 years, the sharing of information, the collecting and the sharing of information has changed everything, in a really important way, that now you've got this incredible knowledge, but there's still so much we don't know, but people don't realize that. So you've gone down this totally different path.
Well, what's interesting is like where it's kind of gone is you go. I think some of this is social media related. Everybody's like likes to go work with the big toothy sharks. Not saying that they don't need some research, but it's like you don't need 1,000 people studying white sharks. I mean, you get some really, you can get some neat pictures, I guess, and stuff, but they are impressive animals. I'm not going to diminish it, but I tell young people, if you want to make a name for yourself, find something that nobody's studying and become the expert on it. And that's what I did essentially. And at the time, but again, when I was coming out, we were just any shark. We didn't care what it was. We worked rays, and rays and skates are just flat sharks. If you just take a shark and you flatten it down, that's a ray. And so I use flat shark a lot of time because people get more excited about it. And rays even need more research done than the sharks. And And so I try to get, like I said, I tell people, like, go study something nobody else is working on and become that expert. Because the thing is, the skills you'll learn, it's not so much the species, but the skills you'll learn on feeding, aging, growth, reproductive behavior, movement stuff, the things you can apply to a whole array of things. And I kind of I talked to you, I mentioned about, just got to bring this part of the story that full loop, is that when when I first met Leonard, he was working on this catalog of the sharks of the world. Well, in 2013, I published a book with Leonard and Mark Dando and Sarah Fowler on the sharks of the world. Mm-hmm. And so
40 years later, right? That's pretty cool.
Well, yeah, like whatever, 30 years later or so, yeah. 40, yeah. So I'd come full circle from having remembered Leonard working on the sharks of the world to co-authoring a book with him on the sharks of the world. Yeah. And so it was pretty cool. And then we did a lot of other publications in between, but it was just kind of neat to have that trajectory from having been the mentor or being a mentee to becoming a mentor and stuff.
How fun is that, right? And just to put it in perspective, you've got something like 30 odd books and 400 or 500 papers that all have made an impact on the field and the understanding. So let me ask you this, because I've kept you a long time. What's the goal? Like what drives you at this point now that, keep going down that path? Like, what is the impact of studying something that is lesser known? Like, what can change? What can you do to make the world better by doing the work you're doing?
Well, when I started out, I just wanted to be a scientist. I wanted to travel and do the research. That was most of my career. But I find as you get along in your life and career, I want to challenge myself to new things. And so, as you know, I've gotten into like podcasting now. Yep. And, I have had my own students now, though I'm kind of winding down. I still mentor students a lot, but I don't have the lab I had, partly thanks to COVID, but it kind of led me into some new challenges. Like I never really thought that heavily in terms of like being a science communicator, but we started this podcast, Andrew Lewin and I, called Beyond Jaws, and we have a YouTube channel. And the thing is, having had the experiences I've had in life, I have a lot of just, 40 years of knowledge there. And so we bring people on the show. Some of them are from the Jaws generation. You see people like Chris Lowe, Lisa Natanson, Greg Skomel. We all kind of came up together. There are others too. I have them share their stories, and then I bring on some younger people that are just maybe finished their PhD or master's or some, share where they are. And of course with them, I say like, where do you see your career in 20 years from now? And we have the tape, so it'll be around on the internet somewhere. And some people in their mid-careers talk about what they've done. So we get people, we're a little different. We talk about people's journey. And I think a lot of it is because I've had such an amazing journey through my own career. And I want to kind of capture that for other people.
The most important part about this is something that I just cannot stop talking about, which is the energy ripples that we produce. Whatever we do, every moment of every day, we are sending out either positive or negative, and ripples that we have no idea where they will end up. Like the people that you just mentioned, the experiences that you just shared, the stories, those people have no idea that those memories and those stories are so present in you and that had such an impact on your life, and that you're now sharing them or continuing to ripple their energy and their importance and what they've done. So like, just always like to remember that, to like recognize that whatever work you do, if you're doing what seems like kind of a solo, small in the scheme of the world thing, it is going to make such an impact on people, and it will matter, right?
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's a lot of my thing now is to try to raise awareness these little known sharks and to try to pass on. I mean, you can tell, talking to me, I'm still that 5-year-old kid at heart. I mean, I'm like super excited, like whatever I'm going to do. And I talked about the podcast. I just started this other YouTube channel, Lost Shark Guy.
I saw there's a few videos that have
I got the first 3 episodes are up. Go check them out. It's the series. It's a documentary series on YouTube. I have. It's called,
and they're short. They're
short. Yeah, they're like 7 to 14 minutes, and they're short. And but they tell a story. And they're just like, it's searching for lost sharks, extinct or alive, and it's to raise awareness of these little known sharks. And I basically go to different countries, and you'll notice as a series we have about 8 or 10 episodes planned right now. The first 3 are up, and you'll know I'm working with usually some grad student from, Peru or Ecuador or Timor-Leste or Indonesia or Australia. So I'm working with young grad students and all these.
Changing their lives.
Yeah, just, and this is all passing along this knowledge and documenting these things. And again, trying to tell a story about these. And check the first episode on the Ecuador's lost shark. I don't want to give it away here, but go check it out.
Like seems like it's a story that's guided the way you've lived your choice of the way you've lived your life. Like you're looking for the unknown and the wonder and the awe that comes from any new discovery is just the goal. Like, as you said, I said, what's your favorite shark at one point when I said, which I write my episode about, you're like, it's the one I don't know yet. Yeah. It's the Christmas gift of the unknown. Like, and just to live in a sense of surprise and wonder and curiosity to that extent without being disappointed. Like, there's no expectations. And to just live life that way is so incredibly brilliant.
I had a very dear friend of mine years ago when I was still a grad student gave me a book called The Road Less Traveled off Robert Frost. And that kind of sums up my life.
Put it in perspective of the contribution that you make. Like, it's, the stories that you tell are somewhat quite humble in the impact that you make. But the work you do reminds me of a lecture I heard by Linda Iannello, who is a black water photographer off the coast of Florida where I live. And I heard her speak at Loggerhead at a By the Sea lecture. And she blew me away. It was the first exposure I'd had to this whole, the idea of that she's doing, which is to identify and to photograph and to record and to study, but not to study, but to give identity to species, which there are way more that we don't know about in this world than we do know about in the oceans, in the jungles, but definitely in the oceans, so that we can recognize that life in the ocean is incredibly valuable. And the fact that we don't know that animals are there, that species of animals and plants are there, doesn't make them not worthwhile. So that when we talk about bottom trawling and sea mining and all of the destruction for extraction of the oceans, that offer a huge amount of gratitude to you for identifying and going to places that we aren't going, and identifying species that are living and thriving in places that we shouldn't be destroying. Because they matter. They're part of the biodiversity. They're part of the food chain. They're part of life where we don't know that much. So can you go with that just a bit?
Yeah. You think about things, the best example I could use, you look at stuff like, I'll use white sharks as an example because it's charismatic. Lots of people want to study it. But as I tell people, like, when you start noticing there's a problem with the white shark population,
too late.
It's too late because there's a whole bunch of things that have happened below that. And it's all of these lower trophic level sharks. These are like, your dogfish, your hound sharks, your stingrays, your skates. And a lot of these things have been impacted. And then because you have white sharks, they're impacted at that point in time. And
if they haven't been able to find them as food, and there's a problem with the white sharks, there's a lot of stuff that the whole food chain happened before that.
Exactly.
And that happens with orcas now, right? Like, we're worried about the orcas, and it's their whole food chain that really has been the problem before.
Yeah, well, it's great that you brought up the orcas because, again, this is a bit controversial, and I'm not taking a side because I have good friends on both sides of this issue in South Africa on the whole thing about the orcas displacing the white sharks in the Western Cape, around Cape Town and that part of the world. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, having been there at the time, there used to be quite a few white sharks there. Other sharks have disappeared, and the orcas now are, you see a couple of these orcas are impacting them as well. And so I think, and then the other people think, no, it's been strictly these two orcas that have replaced all the white sharks. I'm like, man, I don't know. And I'm kind of like, I don't know, there's a lot of white sharks. There used to be a lot of white sharks there. I think there's something more going on, just my opinion. It could
be. But these are, again, these charismatic species that we're talking about, that there's so much behind the scenes that people like you and people like Linda, who are filming and actually recording and giving the research, the evidence that this rest of this world exists and is absolutely vital to the survival of these charismatic massive creatures, is something we need to focus on, because if we destroy that whole aspect of the biodiversity and the ecosystem, we're going to have nothing left, right?
Yeah. No, you're right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, you got to. South Africa is one of the 5 most diverse shark and ray faunas in the world. So like, there's a lot of other stuff. Go study it, because I look at it as like, what is it, the Pink Floyd song, Another Brick in the Wall?
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you know as well as I
do.
If young people, you don't know it, go check out Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall. But that's literally what it is. All these other species are a brick in the wall. And like, it kind of sitting at the top, you got the white shark, for example. And if and orcas above that, and if you start pulling out all these bricks below them, your structure is going to collapse. And that's where you should go out and look, because you'll learn the same skill. And something else I tell grassroots, learn skills. I can teach you about sharks, but the skill set you learn is what's going to get you a job and allow you to go study other sharks if you stay in the field or somewhere else.
And make a difference in our world.
And make a difference, yeah. You don't need to do the same thing that everybody else is doing in that area. And that's what drives me a lot still, too, to try to inform and, make people aware of these other things that are going on.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So super generous. Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for being here. But give us some last, a story that totally will blow, another story that just is one of your favorite to tell about something you learned. I'd love to hear some aha moment where you were like blown away, and then last words of wisdom. So
well, I say the kind of a good example that kind of ties in a lot of the stuff. We talked about working with fishermen, working in remote areas and stuff. This is a story that happened about, 7-8 years ago to me. I was going to Sri Lanka to work with some colleagues there and do some surveying. And I can't remember, maybe 5-6 months before I went there, I got a picture from a friend of mine of this weird looking shark. And I'm going, man, I think that's this new species I'm working on. I had one specimen from India, and I go I think this is a new species here. Wow. And so I said, hey, look, let's make sure we go to this place. I only had photographs of it. Let's make sure we go to this place. So a few months later, we went to Sri Lanka. They scouted out this area, and we went there. And so this is the brilliance of, this is one thing about modern technology, having a camera phone. We went there, and you had to be there between about a 2-hour window of the day. If you weren't there, you'd see nothing. You'd have no idea there was a fishing place. But we were there. We knew about it literally because of a photograph I'd received. Wow. And I talked to some of the guys, and I showed them a picture of the shark, and they're looking at it, and they recognized the boat and all this stuff. And they're kind of like, oh, yeah, come back tomorrow. And I said, okay, I'll come back tomorrow. And so I came back the next day, and they got one.
Wow.
And I said, do you catch these very often? Of course, this is after I was running up and down the beach doing fist bumps, cartwheels. I mean, it was like hurting my body just because I was so pumped up. I mean, you talk about the 5-year-old in me running around as a,
We need to stay kids. We need to stay odd.
Mentally, I'm still a kid. My body doesn't always agree with that. But I'm with you. But I try to stay in shape, though. But hey, the whole point was they brought the shark in, and I said, how often do you catch these? And they said, well, we had 3 yesterday. We just threw them back because they're not really worth anything, which is unusual in a lot of these countries. But they're mainly fishing for a shark liver oil fishery, which the Sri Lankans did not know about until I sent them this picture. And then they went and investigated and found there's a whole fishery going on for shark liver oil that nobody knew about.
Wow.
And so this one thing led to another, and I ended up getting this whole new species of shark that we named back in 2018, 2019, literally from a photograph I got from a WhatsApp from this marketing. Right? Anyways, but that, if you talked about one of those, if I had to encapsulate a lot of different things, knowing the fishermen, talking to the people, that was probably one of the,
that's
just
amazing.
Encapsulates a lot of things. So,
it does. It's like the whole journey of is all about the unexpected.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's all, because if you know what's coming next, it's not an adventure, and I like adventures. Right. So
exactly.
I always
but
like
I
that.
gotta ask you, sharks. I haven't quite grasped what it is about sharks that has enamored you for your whole life. What is it that just blows you away?
I think it's bigger than just sharks. I think you find something you really want to do.
No, I know, but what was it that got you? Something about.
I just thought trying to think of the 5-year-old. I thought they were like the coolest, and it was just I hate to say goofy little book because it inspired me. My mom still has the book.
Wow.
It was just inspired me. I just thought these were the coolest things I'd ever seen. And a lot of kids, you grow out of that phase. I just never did. I just thought, and then because I went along when I was young, I really got into enjoying geography and traveling and National Geographic, these exotic places. I thought I wanted, and that's where I got into this whole thing. I want to travel and go, study sharks because those are the two things I really wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so I just stayed like laser focused, and I kind of few things I tell people, particularly young people, but any age can really help. But if you find something you want to do, if you and just in life in general, if you have a positive attitude about stuff, if you have a drive, you're focused, you're persistent, and above all else, if you're passionate, you'll be amazed at where you'll go in life. And I'm the living proof of it. I never would have guessed I would be where I am today.
There's literally something that like I'm picturing you like being inspired by sharks because they're tough. They just keep going. There's this incredible perseverance, resilience, and energy, like just positive, like I got this energy, right?
I found my passion and my focus in life early in life. And
that's awesome.
And they say, just the way it is. So.
Thank you, Dave, so much for sharing this time with us. I'm so excited about Shark Week coming up. Tell us quickly, like what you've got coming up. And I know you've got this great video series, and you've got Shark Week. Like, tell us more. Where can we find you?
Go up on YouTube. Go to at Lost Shark Guy, and I've got the first 3 episodes of Searching for Lost Sharks, Extinct or Alive. It's on YouTube. The other YouTube thing I have is Beyond Jaws podcast with Andrew Lewin. And there's a whole, we're up, we got about 125 episodes up now. And you hear people, in fact, we got a special Jaws episode. It'll probably be up by the time this comes out. Where I have Lisa Natanson, Chris Lowe, Grace Gomel. We're all part of the Jaws generation. And just a quick sneak peek, like Chris Lowe, who's on the show, he grew up in Martha's Vineyard when they were filming the movie Jaws. And a lot of the people in the movie were friends of his. And
that's so cool. I have to shout out Louis Pugh, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his last name right, P-U-G-H, who just swam around Martha's Vineyard to prove that it was not scary. Because that's where it was filmed, right? So he swam the entire circle with shark-infested waters to like prove that we need to move past this. Thank you so much, Dave.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Great.
I'm looking forward to staying in touch. Thanks for everything.
You too. Take it. Bye-bye.
This has been a production of BLI Studios, produced by me, Kai. Follow along with our other BLI produced shows at balancinglifesissues.com/podcast-BLI. Got an idea for the show? Email me, Kai, at balancinglifesissues.com. And don't forget to stay in touch with your host, Jessica, at jessica@winwinwinmindset.com. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah.